welcome to Interfaith Connections. I am your host, Jackie Fuller. In our first segment, we are featuring a special kind of segment that we want you to have some more knowledge of concerning things that's been happening in our world lately. And we have on the show today, Rizwan Jaqua. He is the co-chair of the All Dulles Area Muslim Society, and he also serves as the chair of the Board of Trustees. He has many works, so I want to make sure I have all that correct for our audience, as well as serving on the Interfaith Committee. So we would like to welcome you today on the program, and thank you so much for coming on board.
Jackie, thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity, and peace be with you.
Thank you. Now, can you share with us some background information about yourself and the various roles that you're involved in?
Okay, well, no, thank you, Jackie. My parents come from Pakistan. I was born and raised here in the United States of America. I'm married to Priscilla Martinez, and we have 6 kids. We're all involved in scouting and interfaith work. I'm a manager in the technology industry, come with a computer science background, so technical background, and I've mostly raised in Texas, so I'm a Longhorn. Hook 'em horns. And as far as Adams, the All Dulles Area Muslim Society, we are the largest mosque Muslim community in the DC metropolitan area and in Virginia, and actually in the top 3 largest Muslim communities in the United States of America. We have 10 full-time and part-time branches in Northern Virginia and Washington, D.C. And actually, 2 of our branches of our mosque are hosted at synagogues and 1 at a church. So we have a very interfaith community that's supporting our mosque.
Okay, and we also have a picture of the mosque we want to share with our audience. So have them take a look. And in addition to that, can you share with us some of your interfaith work? What are you involved in from the interfaith perspective?
Okay, no, thank you so much. Our community has been involved with interfaith work since actually the 80s and 90s from the foundings of our mosque. We actually support, sponsor, and host over 100 interfaith programs throughout the year. I'm actually a representative of Adams on the board of the Interfaith Conference of Metropolitan Washington. Also, we have our community leaders like Imam Muhammad Majid is the chair of Fairfax County Faith Communities in Action. And our interfaith director, Farhanaz Ellis, is the president of the Loudoun Interfaith Bridges. And so we work with our brothers and sisters of all faiths to host various events, as well as sponsor and participate in various programs. For example, we were all together at the 9/11 Unity Walk yesterday, which was an amazing display of people of all faiths, of backgrounds and traditions, walking together in harmony and in peace.
Okay. And from that involvement in the community in so many different pockets, how has that been received by those in Fairfax County or even in Northern Virginia?
Oh, I think, we're blessed to live in this area, wonderful neighbors and partners in the area that work together with us. Like, for example, we've done Jewish Muslim Scout Pinewood Derby for the Cub Scouts. It was actually a combination of the Jewish Committee on Scouting and the Islamic Committee on Scouting. We hosted it one year at the Olam Tikva Synagogue in Fairfax, and this past year at the Adams Center, our main center in Sterling. But again, great partnerships. For example, Northern Virginia Hebrew Congregation is the synagogue where we have our Friday prayers and our Ramadan prayers. Prior to that, we used to host our Friday prayers in the United Christian Parish in Reston. So we have seen the wonderful partnerships between people of all faiths in so many different areas. One example, of course, we're part of the board of Reston Interfaith, which is now called Cornerstones, right. Operates a shelter and pantry. So I think the one thing in Fairfax County and Loudoun County and the whole Northern Virginia area, we've got great interfaith action, where we're working together to help those in need and in great sustained partnerships.
Okay. And for you personally, how has that involvement in all that you do with Adams in the community, how has that enriched you with your spiritual life?
I think it's something that we talk about. Interfaith work actually increases our faith. It does not diminish our faith or water down our faith. It actually increases our faith. That, for us as Muslims, God tells us in the Quran that He's created us as nations and tribes so that we may get to know one another. And so I feel that my family and I and our community are living our faith by working with people of other faiths, by respecting each other, by working with each other, by learning about each other, and increasing harmony and peace.
And what are some of your success stories with the work you've done?
So I think the great success stories that I feel is that when we are like our youth, when they take on interfaith work, without being told to or asked by their own. For example, you came to our Interfaith Iftar, which is in Ramadan. We host a interfaith breaking of the fast. And Ramadan is our month of fasting. And you probably saw one of our Eagle Scout candidates at the time. He was actually raising money and donations of backpacks and school supplies to help benefit children of military families. That was something that he came up on his own. Prior to that, we had Eagle Scout candidates that they raised food. They collected food for a Catholic nursing home or for Rest in Interfaith on their own. They came up with these. So it's something where, we can see they have great families, great parents, and they've really understood the message that God has told us in the Holy Quran to get to know one another, to respect other faiths. And so that is something that, just is a wonderful feeling to see our youth take on those leadership roles and getting involved in interfaith work.
And what has the feedback been like from the young people and those of other traditions that come to iftars? What do they tell you? What has their experience been like as far as being educated about Islam and what is important in regards to connecting with different communities? What has that feedback been like for you?
Oh, I think it's been great feedback. This July 13th was our 7th annual Interfaith Iftar. We were highlighting coalitions of interfaith organizations. Actually, last year, in our 6th annual one, we talked about fasting and all the faith traditions. So we had Christian and Muslim and Jewish, and we also had Baha'i and other faith traditions talking about their fasting in each of their faiths. So when people come to our iftar, they learn about that how much we have in common. And that's something that has been very important, that even God tells us in the Holy Quran that, fasting has been prescribed to you just like it has been prescribed to those that came before you. And so we have so much in common, and I think that's the overarching theme and the feedback we get from the people that have come to the mosque for the first time. As you know, we have government officials, law enforcement, people of other faiths join us, and that's something that they all feel that, commonality, that we're so much alike and that we have so much to learn about each other.
And does your organization participate in what is called faith-based advocacy? So are you involved with, getting the word out about maybe different things that's going on with either elections or something that may be passed at this local state level, just to build awareness in your community or the greater community? Is the organization involved in faith-based advocacy work?
That's a great question. And actually, in our community, being the largest mosque in the area and with 10 branches, we have over almost 7,000 families now, representing about 25,000 people. And so we actually have a voter registration drive. We actually are we have members of our community involved in environmental protection advocacy. We're members of the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy that has been doing advocacy as well in the Virginia State Legislature. We invite many government officials. They come to our mosque and we talk to them about current events and how we can help. We also work with law enforcement to help protect our nation as well as to protect our civil rights. So we work with the FBI, with a lot of the local police departments to make sure that we're working together to safeguard our country, to safeguard our communities, and to have a more peaceful and safe area.
Okay. And in your opinion, why is it so important to do interfaith work from an Islamic perspective?
I think, to do interfaith work, as I mentioned, it's something that is a part of our faith, from the Holy Quran, that we're, encouraged to get to know one another and respect people of all faiths. And so it's important from an Islamic perspective. And I think that obviously, as you started out, that there's so many challenges today and many misunderstandings. Right. And I want to make sure that people understand that Muslims, we condemn terrorism, we condemn violent extremism. We're working to, as I said, partner with our law enforcement for national security. security. And it's so important that we understand each other, that mutual respect and understanding is critical. And I think that's, where we, alleviate misconceptions.
Okay. Now with the IFC, can you share with us your role in that, and how are you involved, and where would you like to see the organization go within the next 5 years?
Oh, no, thank you. I've actually been on the board for several years. I was a past chair of the Interfaith Conference of Metropolitan Washington, and then recently served for 4 years as treasurer. Now I'm just a regular board member, and the Interfaith Conference has a 35-year legacy and history here with 11 faith traditions as a part of it. We have actually a book we published that is written by leaders of the 11 faith traditions, basically strengthening teaching about religion. We do various events like an interfaith concert and interfaith dialogue and bridge builders event, to really strengthen the interfaith work. But the books are really important, the teaching about religion, so people can really understand and learn about each of the 11 faith traditions. So we really want to take, IFC, to continue with bringing faith communities together, kind of like a United Nations of faith communities, and also help educate the grassroots and have the leadership continue to work together and help support more community service, helping those in need. That's, I think, something that's very important to all groups. And so to have more interfaith action where we are, working for advocacy and helping those in need. We actually host the Greater Washington Interfaith Power and Light. They're a subsidiary of the Interfaith Conference of Metropolitan Washington. So we've really tried to continue to help in all areas where we can, go from interfaith dialogue to interfaith action and interfaith community service.
Now, you're involved in so many different activities. How do you manage to juggle it all between like professional and family life? How do you do that as a leader?
So I mean, definitely it's something where, multitasking, load balancing is very important, coming from the technology industry, but also my wife and I and our 6 kids, we're all active. And that's something that, our imam, he always says the family that prays together stays together. And I believe that the family that volunteers together, and this is what I try to say, steers together. We try to, we encourage that families volunteer together. And so it's something that, when the family's all together involved, we're able to, spend our time in, in interfaith work and community service and in Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. And so it's a blessing, and we pray to God that God accepts the efforts and we can do more with our time.
Okay. Now, have there been any challenges with any of the organizations you're affiliated with in doing the outreach work or the education work in the community?
And so, over the many years, there have been, some challenges where, we've had vandalism against our mosque, after the horrific attacks of 9/11, which as all Americans and as Muslims, we condemn the horrific attacks of 9/11. We had vandalism for several years after that. And actually in 2004, the interfaith community said enough is enough. And they actually did an overnight vigil and sat in our parking lot to protect our mosque from any further vandalism. After that, we never had any other vandalism. And we thank God and we thank our interfaith partners. And that's something that the overwhelming majority in our area are so supportive and counteract the small fringe of hate crimes or hate messages that come out of a fringe group here and there.
Okay, and I want to share with the audience pictures of the Cub Scouts and the Boy Scouts of America. So I want to feature that so they can have an idea of what is going on at your mosque. And then there's also the Girl Scouts. And then we also have a picture of an interfaith event, which is, the setup is very nice. It's very exciting to see that. And then we also have another photo of a presentation with law enforcement. And I want to get back to that. How has that been with the police in your community in regards to like the outreach work and building relationships? What has that been like, particularly with the police?
Great. Yeah, it's been a great partnership, as far as working with law enforcement. Every year, actually we started in 98 or 99, we did a law enforcement appreciation at the Adams Center, and we've continued that tradition. We call it now the Peace Gathering and Public Safety Appreciation Event, where we've honor law enforcement and public safety officials. It's our 13th annual event. We just had on September 13th, we come together to remember the victims of 9/11. We come together to honor law enforcement for what they do day in and day out, and our fire departments as well. And the relationship is amazing at the local level, regional level, and the national level. It's a partnership for, again, safety in the community, safety in the region and counties, and safety in the country. It's something where we actually work together for counterterrorism, for counter-violent extremism, for counter-radicalization as well, to make sure that we're protecting our country. And it's been mutual respect that is developed out of working with law enforcement. And we work together on other events as well, to make sure that our area is safe.
Okay. And how does the work with the young people, particularly young adults, how has that been? I know it seems like in a lot of communities that once kids go to college, they disconnect with their religious communities that they've grown up with and it's been part of the culture. In some cases, they have drifted from that. Has that been something you noticed lately in your work or at your mosque?
So I think, for all houses of worship, that's something that, we want to stay connected with young adults and, with our youth. And, we have, as you saw, a vibrant scouting program, over 300 scouts. We've got thousands of children that come to our mosque for educational programs and sports. We have a basketball facility indoors, and we have different sports activities. And so we've been focused on family, focused on youth. Our board, we have 13 members of our board. We're elected to the board. We have actually more than half of our board, or about half of our board, is young adults. Actually, I was elected to the board when I was 29. And so we have young adults involved in our community at every level. Obviously, we want to continue to reach out to young adults to get them involved in our community, to volunteer, to help out. And a lot of our young adult families, join our scouting programs and volunteer within that. So it's something that we continue to work with our young groups and young youth, and we look forward to more partnerships with the young adult community.
Okay. And for our viewers, if they want more information, how can they get in touch with you, or how can they learn more about Adams? So
obviously online, the adamscenter.org is our website. So ADAMScenter.org. We have a Facebook as well page that you can check our website and get access to that as well. And so that's the best way to get in touch with us. Again, we have 10 branches, full-time and part-time. Our main center is in Sterling, and our address and contact information is on our website. And we look forward to seeing people together. And we have actually upcoming events, like there's the Weekend of Twinning coming up in November, which is a nationwide and actually worldwide program of Muslim and Jewish congregations in the U.S. and around the world getting together, and we're going to have different events, published on our website. Beyond that, we have a free clinic, a community clinic to help people of all faiths that are uninsured and underinsured. So if you go to adamscenter.org, you can find out more information about all of that.
Okay, well, thank you, Rizwan, for all that you provided today about the Adams Center and the work you're involved in with the community.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Appreciate it very much. Peace be with you.
Thank you, and you're welcome. And we will be right back with Interfaith Connections.
Each year, nearly 150,000 women will learn they will undergo a mastectomy due to breast cancer. But 7 out of 10 women are never told about their breast reconstruction options. Every woman deserves the chance to know those options.
Dinner makes a difference. Learn more at casafamilyday.org.
Welcome back to Interfaith Connections. I am your host, Jackie Fuller. In our second segment, we are going to cover the most asked topic by yours truly in regards to anything interfaith related, and that is Interfaith Dating, Relationships, and Marriage. And I have with me today Susan Katz-Miller, who is the author of Being Both, Embracing Two Religions in One Interfaith Family. Hi, and thank you for coming on the show, Susan. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jackie.
Sure. Now, can you give our audience some background information about yourself?
So I'm part of a 3-generation happy interfaith family. My Jewish father married my Protestant mother in 1960. So they've been married more than 50 years now. And I think that has given me a really positive attitude towards this topic, whereas a lot of people feel very negative about it. And my husband and I have been married for more than 25 years now, and we have raised 2 children with both Judaism and Christianity. And that is a controversial and relatively new pathway, but it's one that more and more families are taking.
Okay. And what inspired you to write this book?
I was looking through the literature and I didn't see a lot of those positive stories that reflected the experience that I had growing up in a happy interfaith family. And I didn't see much description of this idea of raising children with both of their ancestries, both of their cultures, both of their traditions, both of those belief systems. And so I did a lot of research. I'm a journalist by background. I'm a former Newsweek reporter. So I spent 10 years writing the book. And I surveyed over 250 parents and over 50 grown children who had been raised with both family traditions. And then I interviewed many of those people.
And I want to share with the audience the cover, and would like to know what inspired you to pick this particular design.
I love the cover that the press designed for me. And what I did was I gave them a list of metaphors that I used in the book. And I don't know if you can see, but that's actually a Venn diagram. It's 2 circles overlapping. So it shows what you could interpret as one religious space and the other religious space, and then the overlap period. And so when we raise these children, what we do is we give them really the opportunity and the permission to explore both of the 2 distinct religions represented by their 2 parents, but also that intersection, which is the common ground, the overlap.
Mm-hmm. Now, what has been the key mission or vision? What would you like people to take when they're reading this and take out of it? What would you like for them to experience, learn, and share with others?
Well, first of all, that idea that you can both keep your religions and you can both pass on your religions. And what the research I did on the children showed was that they're not confused, they're not screwed up, they're not angry, they're not all putting religion aside because they were raised with 2 religions. In fact, they're very articulate about who they are, they're comfortable in their interfaith skins, and they appreciate the interfaith education that their parents have provided for them. And when you think about it, I really feel that all children should have an interfaith education. In the world we live in our very diverse country, it's important for all of us to understand a little bit about each other. But especially for the children who come from those families, it's really important for them to have that education so that they understand what their grandparents, what their cousins, what their uncles and aunts are doing in their religious lives and what their beliefs are and what those traditions are. Even if the child ultimately decides to choose a different religion, at least they'll have that familiarity and that comfort and that affection for that religion that's represented in their family.
Now, do you have any success stories you can share with those you interacted with in your work in regards to either interfaith dating, marriage, I guess in particular, because I'm curious to know more about like when it starts, because that's where I think a lot of people are.
Right. A lot of people struggle when they're first dating, and especially when they first sort of come out to their families as an interfaith couple, because often the 2 people in the couple can get along and can respect each other, but they feel a lot of pressure either from extended family, parents, in-laws, or from clergy and religious institutions who are trying to dissuade them from the relationship. And that's where it gets really complicated. And so I think it is very, very helpful to have a support system. And that's one reason that I think this grassroots movement has started up, where interfaith families are coming together and forming communities to support each other. And the group we have here in Washington, D.C., which is called the Interfaith Families Project of Greater Washington, is the group that my husband and I raised our children in. It has over 100 families in it now. And those families, when we get together, you just feel a comfort level that everybody there understands what you're going through, and you don't have to explain anything to them. And that's, very reassuring. And there are similar groups that have sprouted up in New York, in Chicago. There's smaller ones in Boston and Philadelphia. And so as more and more people intermarry, they're going to feel a need for these support groups and form them. And that's how they get going.
It's interesting that you mentioned that too, because with the support system, what can a couple do if one person doesn't have the confidence or the courage to tell their family that I'm interested in dating someone of another tradition? Has that been something that's come up with your group or just in your work in general?
Well, I've certainly encountered and briefly counseled a lot of people in that position. I'm not a professional counselor, but because I wrote the book, people come and tell me their stories, and it's a wonderful thing to exchange those stories, and you find those commonalities. I think it's really important for the two people in that couple to support each other and to present a united front and to be strong and to understand what it is that they want and to support each other when they then have to encounter family members who might not be as understanding. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, you have to protect that new family unit that you're forming. If you're going to get married, you have to have the strength to do that. And what we see is that eventually, usually what happens is the extended family comes along. Okay. Because they get to know the person as an individual. At first, they don't know them. All they know is this is somebody from a religion that I'm not comfortable with, that I'm not familiar with. But as they get to know them as an individual, they can't really help themselves, because if your son or daughter loves this person, you're going to end up loving them too. Usually this is what happens, and especially when grandchildren come along.
That's what I was going to ask you next.
Yeah. Because, the grandparents want to have a positive relationship with that grandchild. And so they need to respect the decisions that the couple makes, whether they choose one religion or the other, or they choose to do both, like my husband and I did, or they choose none. It's really up to the couple to make that decision.
Now, what has it been like for holidays? When holidays, especially with fall and winter coming up soon, has there been any challenges, conflicts to say, let's do my holiday, no, I want to do my holiday, my celebration? What is that like?
Well, one of the beauties of deciding to celebrate both is that there isn't a conflict over which ones. We do as many as we can fit in the schedule. Now, the challenge is you can go crazy because there could be a holiday almost every day if you're putting those two calendars together. So there's a risk of being exhausted or just having the logistical challenges of doing way too much, especially when there's children involved. But there's ways that you can moderate that. For instance, I think a lot of Jewish families make a big deal out of Hanukkah because they're not doing Christmas. Right. If you're doing both, I feel like you can relax a little bit and acknowledge that Hanukkah is actually not one of the major festivals in the Jewish year. There are many holidays that are more important. And so we tend to do a modest Hanukkah that doesn't try to compete with Christmas. And then at another time of year, for instance, Sukkot is a fall festival in the Jewish calendar, which is a really fun holiday for kids because you build this thing called a sukkah, this hut, and you go out and you eat there, and you hang fruits and vegetables from the roof, and you look up at the stars, and you can really fully celebrate that, and you don't have to worry about it having a counterpart, because it doesn't really have a counterpart in Christianity. So
that's interesting, because I would think from the children's perspective, they get to be blessed with the rewards. You have Christmas and the gifts. So, but from a parental perspective, it's like you said, it's like there's this pressure. So how, with the children, how do you educate them, not just to see you're getting a whole bunch of different things, but this is part of your culture and your heritage? How does that work?
Well, you don't want to spoil them silly.
Right.
and again, that's why, for instance, Hanukkah, we don't give them a huge pile of presents, because they do get presents at Christmas, and they don't need both. And you really have to resist letting extended families sort of pile on presents, trying to compete. That's not a good thing. But in terms of the real education about the two religions, we try to go as deeply as we can into both. So the Interfaith Families Project here in Greater Washington, which has families coming from Virginia and from as far away as Baltimore, because it's the only group like it here in this area, and we have over 100 families, we have over 100 children in the program now. In every single one of those Sunday school classrooms, you have a Jewish educator and a Christian educator. So they have teachers from both religions who are there to model their interaction, their respect for each other, and to provide those two sets of knowledge about the two traditions that you want those kids to have. And we try to go deep. I mean, we start Hebrew, for instance, which is important in any Jewish practice, in pre-K, so that the kids will be able to understand enough Hebrew by the time they're 12, 13, that if they want to have a bar bat mitzvah, they'll be prepared to do that.
Okay. Now back to your book and with your research, what stood out the most for you in regards to learning about the different traditions and how they're intermarrying, particularly maybe those that you are not connected to? So what would a Muslim Christian or Muslim Hindu marriage, how has that been in your research? What surprised you, or maybe not surprised you?
I did, I focused primarily on Jewish and Christian families for three reasons. One, that's my experience. Mm-hmm. Two, that's the largest cohort of people that have intermarried. And three, those are the families that have formed these grassroots communities that I was interested in writing about. But I do have a chapter towards the end with Hindu, Muslim, Buddhist, other types of interfaith families. And that was really the most interesting for me, because I didn't know as much, and so I got to learn more hearing those stories from those families. But what they had in common was that they also were raising their children with both of their two religions. And if you get two different religions, you're always going to have a different set of issues. So if it's Muslim and Christian, you have a different set of issues than you do with Hindu and Jewish. A different set of challenges, but also a different set of potential benefits or synergies. So for instance, Muslim and Jewish can be very difficult because of the Middle East, because you have that issue that always is going to be sort of blocking you. But on the other hand, you also have a lot of cultural connections. Because they are both, Middle Eastern religions ultimately, you're going to share falafel and hummus and, love for that culture. And so there are synergies, and so it's not all just negative challenges. There's always two sides. There's always benefits and drawbacks. And that's what I keep coming back to, that, because so much of the discourse prior to now has been, this is negative, this is challenging, this is never going to work, you won't be happy. And that's just not the reality that I saw in documenting the book.
And in addition to couples coming from different perspectives, what about those, in your experience, if you have come across this, someone who belongs to a particular faith and someone that doesn't practice any belief system or is an atheist?
Yeah.
How has that come across in your work, and what has the experience or the feedback have been around that? That's
a really important and growing topic, as the percentages of people who are not affiliated with any religion have been growing. And some of them are what we call spiritual but not religious, and some of them are more, classically atheist. those couples, when you have a religious and a not religious person, have a lot of the same issues because you still have two worldviews, two belief systems. And my perspective is, as with two religions, you allow the child to be exposed to both. You allow both parents to talk about what they believe and why, and you recognize that eventually this child will make their own decision, just as all children eventually make their own decisions about their religious affiliations and their beliefs and their practices. You know, even those of us who were brought up in only one religion, often Pew Research has shown a huge rate of change. Like 25% of people change their religious affiliation. 25% of people actually attend more than one house of worship. Now, those aren't just interfaith people. Those are just people who've decided that they are fed spiritually by more than one tradition. So as parents, we don't control ultimately where our children end up. They go out into the world, and all we can do is provide a really good basis. And for interfaith families, I think that includes a literacy in both religions. Even if you choose one as their primary label, that's a valid pathway, but I urge parents to give them some literacy in both. And I also urge parents to help the children to feel positive about being an interfaith child, which they are. Even if they have one religious label, they still have interfaith relatives, they still know they have parents of two religions, and that we want them to see themselves as peacemakers, as bridge builders, as interfaith ambassadors, and not simply as problems.
Right.
No.
And our final question, how can our viewers get more information about your work and find out about your book and what you're doing next?
So to find the Washington area Interfaith Families community, you would go to iffp.net. That's interfaithfamiliesproject.net, iffp.net. I have a number of speaking engagements coming up because my book is coming out in paperback next month. So I'm going to be speaking in Baltimore, in Frederick, Maryland, and in DC at the Jewish Community Center. And you can find those at susankatzmiller.com.
Okay. Thank you so much, Susan. You've been an answer to our prayers with this topic. So we definitely wish you much success in your work. Thank you so much for sharing with us all that you do. We appreciate it.
Thank you for what you do, Jackie.
Sure, you're welcome. And we will be right back with Interfaith Connections.
Every day, computers help our lives and businesses run smoothly. And every day, they're potential targets. Viruses, spyware, and scams are relentlessly being updated, making it easier for hackers and thieves to steal information and control your computer. Protect yourself. Get in the habit of keeping your cybersecurity up to date. Learn how at StaySafeOnline.org today.
I think it makes a huge difference for kids or children of any age to have a mentor.
I like having a mentor in my life because it gives me someone to talk to.
It makes me feel good knowing that I can actually give her advice that helps her make a difference in her life.
The most important thing I've learned from Debbie was to follow my dreams. Seeing Debbie accomplish her goals makes me realize that I can accomplish my goals. January is National Mentoring Month.
Expand your universe, mentor a child.
Other parts of a sexual ethic are universal. For instance, every time we have sex, there must be mutual consent. Consent is never the same as acquiescing, going along with, or submitting to. Genuine consent requires communication, an agreement that yes means yes, no means no, and maybe means maybe. No will not be punished with withdrawal or coercive tactics. And maybe requires waiting for yes without manipulation or pushing. A sexual ethic also recognizes that we need to have a degree of physical and emotional maturity to engage in sex. Rather than setting an arbitrary age of consent, we need to be able to reflect reasonably on our situation. Maturity brings with it a level of self-identity. All of us know teenagers who have been filled with angst as they try to figure out who they are. They will not find themselves in sex. Likewise, those of you as old as me know that we also have times of doubt and wonder when we're not sure who we are. We also will not find ourselves in sex. A sexual ethic also requires taking responsibility for protecting ourselves and our partner from sexually transmitted disease and unplanned pregnancy. This cannot be done effectively in the act or the morning after, but requires the kind of communication and consideration that's born out of respect for ourselves and for our partner. A sexual ethic also requires that the power and vulnerability of two people be equal. Now, certainly, we will find ourselves attracted at times to people with more or less power than we have, but we have a choice whether to act on that. If we have sex with somebody in a position of power over us, or a person whom we have power over, chances are somebody is going to end up getting taken advantage of. A sexual ethic also requires a level of relational maturity. For some people, that'll be marriage. For others, it'll mean knowing somebody enough to trust them. When we're willing to make a commitment and ready to do that, whatever the nature of the commitment and whatever its duration, it must be anchored in fidelity. We might change in ways over time that change the commitment we're willing to make to somebody else. But when that happens, we also have to address it openly and honestly. And we can only do that if there is first and foremost a foundation based on truth-telling, promise-keeping, and dependability. Finally, a marriage ethic recognizes that sex is supposed to be both other-enriching and self-liberating. We give the gift of sex, which is kind and caring and compassionate, but we also receive the gift of sex. Sex is meant to be a joyous celebration without feelings of guilt and remorse. Ultimately, a sexual ethic says that I will not meet my needs at the expense of somebody else. And it recognizes that there are no easy answers and no permanent resolutions, but that we enter into a time of perpetual discernment. And that's a big head start as we navigate our sex lives today.
Welcome back to Interfaith Connections. I am your host, Jackie Fuller. For our third segment, we're going to do a discussion on religion and sexuality from an interfaith perspective. And we have by phone today Reverend Barbara Lee, who is an interfaith minister and author of the book, Sacred Sex, Replacing the Marriage Ethic with a Sexual Ethic. Thank you so much, Reverend Lee, for coming on the show today.
Well, hi, Jackie. Thank you for having me.
Sure, you're welcome. Now, can you share with our audience some background information about yourself?
Sure. I started out in a mainstream traditional church and became a mission developer. And the work I did was all about welcoming people who did not feel welcome in our traditional churches. And a lot of those people were struggling with spiritual questions, and the ministry became an interfaith ministry, one that welcomed people from all different backgrounds, from all different perspectives, including atheists and agnostics. And we continued to follow that trajectory. I became ordained as an interfaith minister, and then I began writing my books in order to bring the message to a larger audience.
And can you briefly explain what is an interfaith minister?
Well, an interfaith minister is one who has training in all of the major faith traditions and who is able to minister to people from those different perspectives. Different people will come from different backgrounds, and my roots are in Christianity. So I work primarily with people who come from a Christian background, but I consider myself a Christian mystic Taoist. And so everything I do in going deeper into my Christian roots is about being opened up to the truth found in all traditions, that place where we experience the divine, where the the distinctions between us become less things that divide us and more things that we want to hold up and celebrate.
Okay. What was the inspiration for writing your book?
Well, a couple of different things. It started, I suppose, with my own personal story, and then finding that my story resonated with so many people as I was in ministry. When I grew up, I had a highly over-sexualized childhood, which included being raised in a home that was filled with pornography, which included being sexually abused by neighbors and other things that were followed by total silence and a lack of any reaction at all. So I grew up with a lot of shame and guilt surrounding sexuality. And I was also raised with a really strong marriage ethic, that if you're married, it's okay to have sex, and if you're not married, it's bad. So I had these competing scripts in my mind because I believed from the experiences that I had that nobody would be interested in me if they didn't have access to me sexually. But I had this script that I wasn't allowed to have sex. And as a result, I made some pretty destructive choices in my life, not having a lot of sex, but feeling compelled to get married to anybody I had sex with, which propelled me into some really negative, unhealthy relationships. What I found through the course of ministry is that my story is not unique, and I don't share it to bring that attention to myself, but to do my part in creating a climate where we can talk openly and honestly about our experiences of abuse and shame and get on with living healthy sexual lives.
Okay. And I have a copy here of your book, and we'd like to ask you what inspired you with the cover for this particular book.
Well, the process of design was with my publisher and the artist and myself. So it was a group effort, and the desire was to have something that would catch people's eye and make them want to pay attention to it. And I think we did that. The intent was to not frighten off people who would think that this was somehow pornographic, which it's not, but also not to frighten off people that would think that it was steeped in negative Christian teachings about sex, which it also is not. There's been a lot of damage, I believe, that's been done by both of those industries, the church industry and the sex industry, in devaluing the beauty and the goodness of sexuality.
Now, do you think that's done in a way, I guess maybe from the religious perspective, to make sure people stay in line and don't have children out of wedlock? What is your perspective based on that?
Yeah, I do think that that's part of it. That was an excellent question, Jackie. I think largely the history in the Christian church since about 400 AD has been a sex-negative message that we began looking at sex as original sin, and that came out of a particular Christian background where a monk was having difficulty controlling his own sexual urges and decided that that must be something so base that we can't control it. And those kind of teachings have kind of permeated Christianity. So well-meaning parents and pastors and teachers kind of pass on unintentionally this fear of sex, that it's something out of control, that male sexuality is predatory and uncontrollable, and female sexuality is destructive. And so it's a lot of fear-based, shame-based teaching that leads to people, again, devaluing sex, devaluing their own bodies, and losing that connection between body and spirit.
Now, have you experienced that with in your research or in your work with other faith traditions? Has there been any feedback in those similar issues that come up around sexuality?
Yes, there have. Not in every tradition, but in a number of traditions, there's that underlying suspicion and fear about sexual impulse and sexual control. Now, there are exceptions to that, and I could point specifically to the Hindu tradition and the practice of Tantra, which is very much a celebration of sexual intimacy. So there are exceptions, but in our culture, here in the U.S., it's been primarily a religiously shaming kind of atmosphere, which has led to a lot of guilt and a lot of people feeling, again, poorly about themselves and not really denying themselves the joy of sexual expression.
Right. And in your opinion, do you believe that the proper sex education, whether it's from family or in a community setting or in a religious setting, can counter those type of issues and not have that stigma attached to it, where people can be more comfortable about their sexuality?
I think that's where we need to start. I think we need to start just by having the conversation. And in a lot of areas in our country, even doing that is particularly difficult. I happen to be in a conservative part of West Michigan where it's difficult to get people to even talk about sex, and where the county that I live in is doing primarily abstinence-based teaching in the school systems, which again is there's nothing wrong with an active choice for abstinence and celibacy, and that's been a lifestyle that's been held up in religious traditions across the board as well. But to advocate for that in a way that creates fear and shame around sexuality is not a healthy approach, nor is it speaking to our young people today. What's happening in many areas is that young people are taking this vow of celibacy because they feel that kind of pressure to do so, and they believe that they can maintain that vow if they only engage in oral sex or anal sex. And unfortunately, what's happening with that is we're getting pockets of sexually transmitted diseases cropping up.
Right, because that was the next question I was going to ask in regards to couples practicing safe sex when you have, again, those type of challenges, and then you maybe have the issue of peer pressure and how all that ties in. So what can be done to, I guess, counter that, but still effectively educate people about sexual health?
Well, what I advocate for is creating a sexual ethic. So getting rid of this marriage ethic that says if you're married, it's okay, and if you're not married, it's not okay, because that approach doesn't speak to most people. It doesn't speak to young people. It doesn't speak to widowed or divorced people. It doesn't speak to gay and lesbian people who aren't allowed to get married in most of the country. It doesn't speak to anybody who's not married. And at the same time, it implicitly condones a whole host of abusive and demeaning behavior as long as it takes place within a legally recognized union. So by creating a sexual ethic, we bring intentionality and discernment to our decisions around how we will be sexual people in the world today. And we take time to craft that so that we're not trying to make those decisions in the middle of a situation, but that we know what the elements of our ethic are going into it. And I think those are the conversations we need to have with our youth, and we can't do that until we know what our own sexual ethic is.
Okay. Now, do you see the work that you're doing kind of ties in? I want to compare it maybe to a Dr. Ruth style that has the spirituality and the sexuality connected. Do you consider yourself along those kind of parallels?
Well, I see myself as kind of an adjunct. I'm not a sex therapist or a sex doctor. What I work with is that connection between body and spirit, sacred sexuality, spiritual sexuality, recognizing that any time we try to divide the body from the spirit, we do damage to both. Dr. Ruth is phenomenal, and I'm looking forward to meeting her at the National Sex Ed Conference this December, where I'll be hosting a workshop, and she'll be receiving a reward. But her focus is primarily on the physical aspect of sexuality, and mine moves into that whole spiritual realm.
Okay. Now, final question. How can our viewers find out more information about your work and your book?
They can go to my website, which is www.thesexminister.com.
Okay, thank you so much, Reverend Lee, for coming on the program, dialing in today. I think your issue is much needed to be discussed in faith communities. It should not be considered a stigma since it's a part of life. And hopefully with the information and resources you have available, it'll be something to consider for many people in regards to dealing with religion and sexuality. So thank you so much for coming on the program.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me and for being willing to open up this kind of discussion for everybody. I appreciate it. Thank you, Jackie.
Sure, no problem. And thank you, our audience, for watching Interfaith Connections today. For more information, go to our website at www.interfaithconnections.squarespace.com, or you can follow us on Twitter at www.twitter.com/IFC TV show. And we also look forward to your comments, so please feel free to connect with us online. Take care and have a good day. Goodbye.